Over 1,000 years ago, a monk traveled through the lands of Japan, leaving a legacy that would traverse generations. His name was Kobo Daishi Kūkai, the founder of the Shingon Buddhist school. It is said that just before his death, he wrote a scroll with a warning: if people continue to follow these 7 habits, they will never achieve true fulfillment. This scroll was lost in the temples of Mount Koya until now. Today, you will learn about the 7 habits that keep success at bay and how to avoid them. Perhaps you're stuck in one of them without even realizing it, but don't worry. Together, we will learn from Kūkai's teachings and transform our journey. Habit 1, the laziness that steals your destiny. Have you ever felt you should be doing something important, but told yourself, I'll do it later? Then days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And before you knew it, that dream seemed too distant to reach? If so, know that you're not alone. Over 1,000 years ago, a young monk lived out this same story. His name has faded into time, but his lesson remains relevant today. In the mountain temples, he watched the masters studying the sutras before dawn, practicing calligraphy, and meditating for hours. He admired their dedication, but every time he thought about starting, he felt an inexplicable fatigue. I'm too tired today. Tomorrow, I'll wake up early and study. But when tomorrow came, laziness whispered in his ear, just a little more rest. And so, the days piled up like fallen leaves in the wind. One day, Kūkai noticed the young man's absence from training and decided to call for him. He found him sitting in the shade of a cherry blossom tree, gazing at the sky, lost in thought. The master sat down beside him and asked with a smile, "What do you see?" The young man, surprised, replied, "The clouds. They move slowly. Sometimes they seem to form something, but soon they dissipate." Kūkai nodded and said, "So are the dreams of those who wait too long." The monk furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, master?" Kūkai then picked up a stick and drew a circle in the dirt. "This represents the time you have in this life. Every day you wait to take action, a piece of that circle fades." With his fingers, he began to slowly erase the line in the sand. "And when you finally decide to move, perhaps there will be no time left." The young man felt a chill run down his spine. He thought of all the times he had promised himself he would start tomorrow. The tomorrow that never came. He jumped to his feet, determined to change, but Kūkai only smiled serenely. "It's pointless to promise you will change. True transformation begins now. Sit down and write the first sutra, just one, and tomorrow write another. If you do this every day, without waiting for the perfect moment, then you've conquered laziness." That day, the young man picked up the brush and wrote his first sutra. The calligraphy was shaky, imperfect, but that didn't matter. He had begun. At first, every word felt like a huge effort, but over time, his mind and hands began to adapt to the discipline. He realized that the greatest obstacle was not his fatigue, but rather the first step. And here's the important truth. Laziness isn't just the act of doing nothing. It is the accumulation of small excuses that keep us from our own destiny. How many dreams have been abandoned because someone said, "I'm not ready yet"? But the question is, will we ever be truly ready? Or is preparation something that happens as we move forward? Maybe today you have an important decision to make, a habit to change, a project to start, a dream to put into action. But if you're waiting for the perfect moment, be careful. It may be that when you finally decide to start, there will be no time left. So tell me, what is the first small step you can take today? Write it in the comments. Habit 2, the pride that closes doors. There's an old saying, water never enters a cup that is already full. But what if that cup is your mind? How many opportunities have slipped by unnoticed because you believed you knew enough already? Pride often doesn't shout, it whispers. It makes us think we're right, that we don't need to listen to advice, that we have learned all there is to learn. But it was this very mindset that caused a young monk to lose something valuable, and he only realized it when it was too late. In Kūkai's time, a young man entered the temple, convinced that he was already wise. He had read many sutras, memorized prayers, and thought he had little to learn from the masters. As the monks trained, he would watch from a distance, arms crossed, thinking, "I already know this." When Kūkai spoke, he only listened to confirm what he already believed, never to truly absorb anything new. And so, day after day, he closed himself off to learning without even realizing it. One day, Kūkai invited him for tea. The young man sat down, proud, expecting to hear words of wisdom. The master poured the tea slowly, but instead of stopping when the cup was full, he kept pouring. The liquid overflowed, spilling across the table. The young man exclaimed, "Master, the tea is spilling." Kūkai smiled and calmly said, "Just like this cup, your mind is already full. How can I teach you anything if you don't leave space to learn?" The monk fell silent. For the first time, he felt a discomfort he had never felt before, and then he realized he had spent so much time trying to prove he already knew that he never made space to truly grow. His pride hadn't made him wiser. It had only prevented him from seeing how much more he needed to learn. Pride is treacherous because it gives us the illusion that we are in control. The truth is, when we close ourselves off to new ideas, we not only stop learning, we also push away the people around us. Who would want to teach someone who always thinks they know everything? Who would want to help someone who never admits their mistakes? Kūkai taught that humility doesn't mean belittling oneself, but rather recognizing that there is always something new to learn. The true wise person is not the one who has all the answers, but the one who never stops asking questions. Because in the end, knowledge has no limits, and the greatest mistake we can make is believing that we have reached the summit. And now I ask you, is your mind also too full to learn something new? Think about the last time someone tried to give you advice. Did you truly listen? Or did you just wait for your turn to speak? If someone were to offer you a valuable lesson today, would you be ready to receive it? Or would it spill over like the tea from the young monk's cup? Tell me something about this in the comments. Humility opens doors. Pride, on the other hand, closes them. And many times, when we finally realize this, it's already too late. Don't let that happen. Habit 3. The envy that corrodes the soul. Have you ever felt a tightness in your chest when you saw someone achieve something you desired too? Maybe a friend landed their dream job. Someone in your family bought a new house. Or a colleague excelled while you remained in the same place. And even if you don't want to admit it, a part of you wondered, why them and not me? If this has ever happened to you, know that this feeling has a name, and it can be more dangerous than it seems. Tell me in the comments if you've ever experienced this. Long ago, in one of the temples where Kūkai taught, there was a young monk named Rensho. He trained every day but never stood out. Whenever he looked around, he saw other apprentices advancing more quickly. There was one in particular, named Haru, who seemed to have a natural talent. His calligraphy was impeccable, his meditation profound, and he was always praised by the masters. At first, Rensho admired Haru, but over time, that admiration began to turn bitter. Rensho started to scrutinize every detail of Haru's success. When he saw Haru being praised, he felt his heart tighten. When the master asked Haru to demonstrate a technique, Rensho pretended to smile, but inside, something burned. He began to wish for Haru to fail, just once, just enough to make him not seem so perfect. And then, without realizing it, he stopped focusing on his own progress and began to only worry about the failures of others. One day, Kūkai called him for a conversation. The master noticed the heavy look on the young man's face and said, "I see that something is weighing on your heart. What troubles you?" Rensho hesitated, but finally admitted, "Master, I try hard, but am never the best. There's always someone ahead of me." Kūkai was silent for a moment and then pointed to a field of flowers. "Tell me, which of these flowers is the most beautiful?" Rensho looked and replied, "They are all beautiful in different ways." The master smiled. "Then why do you insist on comparing your growth with that of others?" It was at that moment that Rensho realized his mistake. He wasn't failing because Haru was better. He was failing because he spent more energy looking at others than he did improving himself. Envy hadn't just stolen his peace, it had robbed him of his own potential. Kūkai taught that envy is like a flame we burn in our own hearts, hoping that the heat will hurt someone else. But in the end, we are the ones who get consumed. True wisdom lies in admiring someone else's success without feeling inferior, in learning from those who are ahead rather than wishing them to fall. Because, in the end, everyone grows at their own pace. And now I ask you, who have you been envious of lately? Who is the person that deep down you wish would fail? Be honest with yourself. And what if, instead, you were inspired by that person? Instead of feeding that flame of envy, try something different and turn that envy into inspiration. After all, if someone else made it, it means you can too. Those who believe, achieve. Habit 4, the vanity that leaves us empty. Imagine that you spend years dedicating yourself to something. You study, train, and put in the effort. But instead of seeking genuine growth, you only concern yourself with applause and recognition from others. Does this really bring happiness? Or is this kind of success deep down just an illusion? Kūkai said that vanity is like a beautiful vase on the outside, but empty on the inside. And this was exactly what a young monk discovered in the worst possible way. In Kūkai's time, there was an apprentice named Daigo. He was talented, intelligent, and had great skill in writing the sutras. But unlike the other monks, Daigo didn't study to find wisdom. He studied to be admired. Whenever he finished writing, he looked around, waiting for compliments. Every time he spoke, he chose elaborate words to impress. His greatest desire wasn't spiritual growth, it was to be seen as superior. One day, a group of monks was called to recite sutras before a local lord. For Daigo, this was his big opportunity. He prepared like never before, practicing his intonation, adjusting every gesture. On the day of the ceremony, as he recited, he thought, "Are they all watching me? Do they see how superior I am?" But so focused on his own performance, he didn't notice something essential. His words were empty. At the end of the ceremony, the Lord praised the monks, but didn't mention Daigo. Confused, he asked Kūkai, "Master, why wasn't I recognized? Wasn't my voice firm? Wasn't my posture perfect?" The master looked at him calmly and replied, "Yes, your voice was firm. Your posture was impeccable. But tell me, was your heart present?" Daigo didn't know how to respond. For the first time, he realized that while the other monks recited with devotion, he was merely performing. He wanted recognition but wasn't seeking meaning. His effort was great, but his soul was absent. Vanity makes us forget why we began. It causes us to live for the approval of others as if our worth depended on how many applause we receive. But Kūkai taught that true greatness does not need to be announced. Those who truly shine don't worry about proving anything to anyone. They simply are. Now take a moment to think. Are you living for yourself or to please others? What have you done just to be recognized? Are your choices truly yours? Or are you living to maintain an image? Because in the end, applause comes and goes. But what truly matters is what remains within you. The pursuit of approval makes us forget the real purpose of what we do. Real success comes from genuine effort, not the need for external recognition. Habit 5, the anger that makes us prisoners. Have you ever said something in the heat of the moment and then regretted it? Have you ever felt your mind consumed by such intense rage that it seemed impossible to control? Anger is like a fierce fire. At first, we believe we are only burning what is around us, but in the end, it's us who get consumed. This was a lesson a young samurai learned while seeking Kūkai for answers, and he would never forget that lesson. This samurai named Kenji had a feared reputation. He was impulsive, impatient, and could not tolerate disrespect. He claimed that his anger was a sign of strength, that he would never let anyone walk over him, but deep down, he knew something was wrong. Wherever he went, he left behind arguments, resentments, and broken relationships. His anger gave him power, but also made him lonely. Desperate to find a solution, Kenji went to Kūkai and asked, "Master, how can I control my anger?" The monk looked at him for a moment and then responded disdainfully, "You? Control your anger? Impossible. You are simply a foolish hothead." Kenji's blood boiled. Without thinking, he reached for the hilt of his sword and shouted menacingly, "What did you say? How dare you insult me?" Kūkai remained calm and with a serene smile said, "This is hell." Kenji froze. Still with his hand on his sword, he felt the weight of those words. His anger, which just moments ago seemed so justified, now felt absurd. Gradually, he let go of the weapon, took a deep breath, and lowered his head. "And this," Kūkai said softly, "is heaven." In that moment, Kenji understood. Hell and heaven were not somewhere distant. They were within him. Every time he chose anger, he imprisoned himself in the hell of impulsiveness, guilt, and loneliness. But every time he chose calmness, he found a heaven of clarity and freedom. Anger is not strength. It makes us captives, turning us into slaves of our own emotions. Kūkai taught that he who masters himself is stronger than he who conquers 1,000 enemies. Because the true battle is not against the world, but against the fire that burns within us. Now, I ask you, how many times have you been a prisoner of your own anger? How many harsh words have you said and later wished to take back? How many doors have closed because, in the heat of the moment, you chose to react instead of reflect? The good news is that this cycle can be broken, because in the end, it's not anger that controls us. It's us who choose to feed it. And the choice, as always, lies in your hands. Remember, anger makes us lose control. It enslaves us. Kūkai taught that mastering the mind is the key to true freedom. Habit 6. The complaint that keeps us stagnant. Have you ever met someone who always has an excuse for everything? Someone who claims that life hasn't given them opportunities, that everything is harder for them, that the whole world is conspiring against their success? Perhaps you yourself have thought this way. Complaining seems harmless, but Kūkai said it is like a rock tied to the feet of someone who wishes to cross a river. While we lament, we remain stuck in the same place, and the current of life continues to flow without waiting for us. In one of the temples where Kūkai taught, there was a man named Goro. He was intelligent, but could never move forward in anything. When he made a mistake on a task, he would say that the master hadn't explained it properly. When he saw another apprentice progressing, he grumbled that that person was just lucky. When something went wrong, he always found someone to blame. Days went by, the other monks evolved, but Goro remained in the same spot, nurturing his frustration. One morning, while Goro swept the temple courtyard, Kūkai approached him and asked, "Goro, why are you always dissatisfied?" The man sighed and began to list all the reasons. "If I had been born into a wealthy family, my life would be different. If I had more time to train, I would already be a master. If the other monks didn't receive so much attention, I would have a chance." Kūkai listened in silence and then asked Goro to follow him to an old well in the temple. The master pointed to the still water at the bottom of the well and said, "Look inside." "What do you see?" Goro leaned over and replied, "Just my own reflection." Kūkai picked up a stone and tossed it into the water. Small ripples formed. "Now, look again." Goro watched as the waves spread, changing the surface of the water. Before, all you saw was yourself, but when something happens, the water moves. It changes. The same applies to your life. As long as you remain still, you will only see your own reflection. But if you take action, the world around you will begin to change. Goro fell silent. For the first time, he realized that his stagnation was not the fault of the world, luck, or others. It was his own lack of action. Complaining was easy, but taking action, that required courage. Kūkai taught that complaining is a dangerous habit. At first, it seems like just a venting of frustrations. But over time, it traps us in a mindset where we are always victims, where we have no control over our own story. And the worst part, the more we complain, the less strength we have to change. Now I ask you, what have you been complaining about lately? Is your life stalled because it truly is impossible to move forward, or because you haven't taken the first step yet? And if instead of complaining, you took action? If you want to see the world change, perhaps the change needs to start within you. Remember, complaining drains our energy. Instead of looking for blame, we should seek solutions. Habit 7. The fear that paralyzes us. Have you ever wanted to do something badly but gave up even before trying? Have you felt your heart racing, your hands sweating, your mind creating 1,000 scenarios of failure, until in the end, you chose to stay where you were? Fear has this capacity. It convinces us that we are protecting ourselves when, in reality, we are just imprisoning ourselves. This was the lesson a young disciple of Kūkai learned when faced with the most difficult decision of his life. His name was Jiro, and he had always dreamed of traveling to China to further his studies, just as Kūkai had done years before. But every time he thought about leaving, his mind filled with doubts. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? What if something goes wrong? The fear consumed him so much that even with everything prepared, the scrolls, the clothes, the boat waiting at the port, he simply couldn't take the first step. On the eve of his journey, Kūkai invited him for a walk and took him to a cliff by the sea. The wind was strong and the waves crashed violently against the rocks. The master looked toward the horizon and asked, "Jiro, what do you see?" The young man replied, "I see the ocean, and it's too vast." Kūkai smiled and said, "Exactly, and if you don't cross it, you will never know what lies on the other side." Jiro lowered his head. "But master, what if I fail?" Kūkai picked up a small stone and tossed it into the sea. "What happened?" Jiro answered, "The stone sank." The master then took a leaf and placed it on the water. The wind gently pushed it forward. "If you're heavy like a stone, you will sink before even trying. But if you're light like this leaf, the very wind will guide you to where you need to go." At that moment, Jiro understood. Fear made him heavy. He was sinking in his own worries before even setting out. But what if he simply allowed himself to be carried away? What if, instead of fearing the unknown, he trusted that he would learn along the way? Kūkai taught that fear is not an enemy to be destroyed. It is a teacher. It shows us where we still need to grow. But if we let it control us, we will never discover what we are truly capable of doing. Fear prevents us from taking the first step. But if Kūkai had given up, he would never become one of the greatest masters in Japan. And now I ask you, what have you refrained from doing because of fear? How much time have you lost waiting to be ready? And if instead of waiting, you simply started? Because in the end, the greatest failure is not making a mistake. It's never having tried. The secret to true success. After everything we've discussed so far, you might be wondering, if these 7 habits push me away from success, then what truly brings me closer to it? Kūkai believed that the answer to this question did not lie in the external world. It's not found in wealth, recognition, or status. True success begins within each of us. But to see it, we need the courage to engage in one final reflection. Once, a man traveled for months to find Kūkai. He'd already achieved many things. He was respected, had money, influence, and knowledge. But despite all this, he felt an inexplicable emptiness. When he finally met the master, he asked just one question: what is true success? Kūkai smiled and asked him to follow him to a small lake in the middle of the forest. When they arrived, Kūkai asked the man to throw a stone into the water. He complied, and immediately circles began to form on the surface. The master then said, "Observe." The stone fell in just one spot, but the waves spread throughout the entire water. Our life is the same. Each action we take generates waves around us. If those actions are guided by ego, fear, or vanity, the waves will be turbulent. But if they are guided by wisdom, effort, and compassion, the waves will bring harmony. The man remained silent for a long time. For the first time, he realized that all the success he had pursued until then was fragile. It depended on the validation of others, on chance, on things he could not control. But true success, that came from within. It was not in having, but in being. Kūkai taught that the secret to true success lies in our ability to master ourselves. It's not laziness that defeats us, but a lack of discipline. It's not pride that closes doors, but the inability to learn. It's not envy that weakens us, but the lack of self-awareness. It's not vanity that deceives us, but the illusion that we need to prove something to others. It's not anger that destroys us, but our choice to feed it. It's not complaining that paralyzes us, but our refusal to take action. And it's not fear that prevents us from growing, but our decision to hide from it. Now, I want you to think for a moment. What waves have you been creating around you? What have your actions spread in the lives of those around you? Because ultimately, true success is not a destination. It's the way you walk. And what you choose to plant today will be what you reap tomorrow. The key to true success is not money, status, or fame. It's the harmony between mind, body, and spirit. If we eliminate laziness, pride, envy, vanity, anger, complaining, and fear, we will be closer to a fulfilling life. Which of these habits do you feel you need to change the most? Write it in the comments, and let's evolve together. If this reflection touched your heart, subscribe to the channel. Let's spread waves of wisdom and transformation together. And remember, real success is not about reaching the top, but about becoming a person that makes the path a better place. Success is not a destination, it's a journey that we walk with wisdom, humility, and determination. Kūkai left us these teachings, but it is up to us to apply them. Leave your like on this video, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.